Hello, and welcome to Horns of a Dilemma, the podcast of Texas National Security Review, TNSR. I'm Doyle Hodges, Executive Editor of TNSR. In this episode of Horns of a Dilemma, we hear a talk by General Robert Neller, United States Marine Corps retired, the 37th Commandant of the Marine Corps. During a moderated question and answer period with Professor Aaron O'Connell and Dr. Paul Edgar of the Clements Center, General Neller discusses broader issues such as the role of the Marine Corps in the future security environment. Let's listen in.
So with that, I'm very pleased to welcome to the stage the 37th Commandant of the Marine Corps, General Robert Neller.
Thanks.
I'd just like to start by giving you an opportunity to let our audience know exactly what the Marine Corps does. Because if you think about it, there's a lot of folks who, if you just ask about the armed forces, there's a general set of assumptions. If it's on the land, the Army does the fighting. If it's in the air, that's the Air Force. If it's on the seas, that's the Navy. Well, that's not really accurate at all. And of course, the Marine Corps fights on land, on air, and on sea. So maybe just to start, so we can get the perspective of what you as a commandant were looking at when facing these problems around the world. What does the Marine Corps do, and what is its contribution to national defense?
Well, the legal stated mission of the Marine Corps is to be able to seize and secure advanced naval bases in support of the naval campaign. So we are a naval force. We are part of the Department of the Navy. After World War II, National Security Act, I believe in 1947 or 51, made the Marine Corps a separate service within the Department of the Navy. And so that still remains our mission. But it seems like every generation or so, whether it be Korea, Vietnam, Desert Shield, Desert Storm, or now the global war on terrorism, we ended up getting into a sustained campaign ashore, which is really not what we're organized, trained, and equipped to do, although we've done that throughout our history. So in this strategy, I didn't mention it, it actually does tell the services in the classified version, and be careful here, specifically what to focus on, not at the exclusion of others. But when you look at the map, and you look at, and remember the threats were China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, and terrorism. I mean, I asked Dr. O'Connell to use this kind of a map because normally the map, shows the Atlantic in the middle. That's the traditional view of America. We show the United States or our hemisphere and then Europe on the other side, and then the Pacific is split because it's kind of an afterthought. Now, this puts the Pacific dead center in the map to let you know and you can see the immense distances involved that were dealt with by our forces in World War II. So the Marine Corps mission is to support the naval campaign. And in the strategy, you would think an Army is a continental force, so you can look at this and who is a continental power against those threats, and who is a maritime capability. And so that's what we're looking at. And we have our space within the operations and the multi-domain operations. The force is a joint force. The Air Force does Air Force missions. We talked about special operations, and you've got others. So the joint force is critically important. So everybody has to be operationally honest, is what I call it, intellectually honest about what you can and cannot do. And so it's a team game, and we don't want to be the Army. We're not the Army. I want a big, heavy junk Army that can go somewhere and fight a sustained land campaign and do heavy logistics. I want a very capable Air Force that can operate in space and in the air, and I want a Navy that can move forces across the sea to protect lines of commerce. And then the Marine Corps is there to, do our capabilities. The strategy also talks about 4 layers or zones: a contact zone, a blunt zone, a surge force, and a homeland defense force. I believe the Navy and the Marine Corps are that contact blunt force because you want your Navy and Marines forward deployed, underway, away from home, able to see what's going on, and then you have to have a force available to surge if this thing if it goes beyond their capability to handle it.
Because there's such a different set of capabilities for a force to arrive immediately and being combat ready, as opposed to have the amount of facilities, logistics, equipment, and capacity to stay in a fight for long periods of time.
And part of a naval force is you're supposed to be able to be self-sustained logistically by coming from the sea.
Okay. Great. I think we could now transition to those specific threats that you gave us a preview of. And for each of these, I think it'd be great to kind of try to understand what threat these nations or networks pose to America's vital national interests. And we typically separate out, if something is a vital national interest, it means you're willing to use force to defend it. It's not just something you want, it's something that you're willing to be violent to keep or to protect. So why don't we move through it? The NDS actually separates things out into 2 revisionist powers, 2 rogue regimes, and 1 network terrorism. So maybe we start with Russia as one of those 2 revisionist regimes who want to change the existing rules. And if you could just give us your sense of what threat do they actually pose to American vital interests, and what is the military piece of countering, mitigating, or dealing with that threat?
Well, the fact that Russia and China and North Korea and we don't believe yet Iran are nuclear powers. I mean, that is clearly something that is a risk to the security of the United States. And the current Russian regime has stated that they might even use tactical nuclear weapons in their doctrine. So I think the Russians, they have gone through they've gone down and they've been built back up. Their military is not the same size as it was, but they've modernized and recapitalized because they had enough money from their oil. And then they've exercised that military in Crimea, in eastern Ukraine, and now in Syria. So are they, do I see them as they could be a threat to the United States. Do I think they're going to invade Europe like we thought they were going to do during the Cold War? They've threatened other NATO nations. They've threatened the Baltic states. They are involved politically. They're active in cyber. So I think in the near term, they have shown themselves to be the most aggressive of these potential threats. In other words, when we say threat, threat has 2 things. You have to have capability and you have to have intent. Do they have capability? Yes. Do they have intent? They have shown intent in certain places on the world. So, and particularly to threaten our allies, NATO allies. So that's why you see U.S. forces, predominantly U.S. Army forces, beginning to reestablish a posture in Eastern Europe because those countries that are members of the NATO alliance are concerned and they see the United States there as an ability to improve stability. So I think we've changed our posture because of the Russians, and I think we've, the support to the Ukraine government to help them fight that continues to go on today. The Syria thing is very complicated, and I don't have any solution to that right now. But the Russians have become much more aggressive, and I think it's in our best interest to pay attention to them. At the same time, we want to talk to them. Mm-hmm. And this strategy says that despite some of the actions of these potential nation states, we still at the same time want to maintain a dialogue and talk to them.
So the idea here is that if we increase our capacity, if we increase our capabilities, if we message properly, then it seems we have an opportunity to change some of their policies, which are being aggressive in separate sort of spheres. But isn't the reverse also possible, that by stationing more capabilities with our NATO partners in Europe, by actually building up certain lethalities, pursuing new high technology issues, we're actually going to incentivize them to increase their own buildup? This is the standard Thucydides trap. The actions you take to try to make yourself feel safe, make the other people feel less safe, and then you have an escalatory cycle. Is that a concern?
I think so, but it's just like we have certain agreements with the Russians, like strategic arms reduction talks, and the INF treaty, which we didn't believe that they were complying with it. And so now I believe we've let it expire, Open Skies Treaty. So when you have a potential adversary and you want to manage it, you establish certain rules and treaties and policies and things to try to temper the potential for a miscalculation. And so I think those are important. And at the same time, we still meet and talk to them at whatever forums there are around the world. And we need to do that. So the dialogue has got to be there because the idea is not to have to go to war. You want to deter war. So as you build your capabilities, you don't want to be disadvantaged so that you're blackmailed. but you have to be mindful of this kind of arms race where you build up. And so at what point, so that's part of the politics of this. That's the political leadership and the diplomacy where they have to figure out where that knee in the curve is, where enough is enough and not too much.
Excellent. Okay, let's turn to China if we could, and it's a very similar question here. What is China doing that it presents threats or risks to American vital national security interests, and what are the military pieces of responding there?
Well, to respond to China, I don't see China as an immediate threat. I think it's more of a long-term threat. But President Xi has pretty much, they have a plan, they have a vision that 100-year plan that by 2042 or whatever it is, that they are going to be the leading nation in the world, both economically, informationally, and militarily. And they're on that path. And they are building a very capable Navy. They reorganized their military forces. They're professionalizing their military. And they're out and about on the world, which, if they're there for stability and rule-based system, then I think that's all good. And we have worked with them. We work with them in piracy things in the Middle East. Again, this relationship, we see ourselves now trying to come up with what we consider to be an equitable trade agreement with them. And I'm hopeful that we'll be able to do that, because if we can do that and maintain economic fairness and trade, then the desire for anybody to do anything incorrectly or miscalculate will go down. So I think it's just interesting to watch the Chinese. They've got things that we do that continue to agitate them, and they do things that obviously are of concern to us. Not so much some of them militarily, a lot of things in cyber, a lot of things in information, a lot of things in economics. So we have to maintain that dialogue. And this trade agreement discussions that are ongoing is just part of that. So the rise of China's military capability is pretty significant, particularly in the last 15 years. And how they grew this fast and where they got the technology and where they found this stuff is probably a discussion for a different place at a different time, not in an open public forum. But they are very capable. They are very focused. They are worthy of our attention. And I think what we want to find is that balance point with them where we're always going to be competitors economically, but where this competition is done on rules that are fair to both sides, and that militarily we work together to maintain a stable world so that commerce and things can flow and we don't have a miscalculation.
Great. Okay, perhaps we'll just do sort of 2 to 5 minutes on each of these just to frame the conversation, yeah? If we could turn to the rogue powers now, right? The way the national defense strategy separates.
Does this get easier?
I think so. We'll see. Is that there are 2 revisionist powers trying to rewrite the rules, and then there are indeed 2 rogue powers that simply refuse to obey the rules, and the NDS is focused on North Korea and Iran. And so if I could just ask, it seems like this is a perfect example of this topic where actions taken to make one side feel more secure can have adverse consequences. So actions we've taken militarily to try to convince North Korea and Iran to reduce or halt nuclear weapons programs seem mostly to produce escalation. And so I'm just curious, do you see a military method or a military path to getting North Korea or Iran to abandon nuclear weapons, or is that primarily a diplomatic task where the military supports by being ready and credible?
Unless you would suggest that we would go, take away their capability, I don't see a military option. So I fully support the diplomatic, but the fact is as the strategy says, the capability of the U.S. military provides leverage and weight to our diplomatic efforts.
Excellent. Okay.
So we have to have a capability. So obviously North Korea and Iran are going to do what's in their best interest for their nation. They have, they have to become members of the world community. They have to follow the rule-based order. They have to. They can't be involved illegally supporting terrorism or in the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction or the sale of missile technology, or involved in other conflicts around the world where they are against a sovereign nation. But again, I think this administration has made an effort, certainly with North Korea, to try to sit down and come up with some sort of a diplomatic solution. But I think that again, you'd have to ask Kim Jong-un, what his thoughts are. But I believe the offer was, you get rid of your nuclear weapons and we will support you economically and you can develop your country as such. It's much more complicated than that. And so far it appears that the answer to that has been, well, I'll think about it, but I want you to give me these concessions first. And the answer so far appears to have been no. Iran is another solution, another problem set. And again, I'm not an Iran or a North Korean expert, but I think as a military member of the U.S., former member of the U.S. military, we see the Iranian influence around the globe. They're very capable within their capacity. And they seem to want to not comply again with UN mandates and other international forums that establish rules that normally we would abide by. Mm-hmm. So, there was the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, in which there was a time period where they were going to not enrich uranium, which would have precluded them from building a weapon. The United States, there was 5 or 6 parties involved with that discussion. The United States walked away from that agreement, and so now you see, at least in the open press, you see Iran saying they're going to start to enrich uranium again, and so that's not good. So there's other actors in the region, and the Iranians have done a number of things that they've denied, to include shooting down a U.S. drone in international airspace, and use proxies to shoot down U.S. drones over other countries. And so they're always out there trying to expand that competitive space and doing things which go right up to the edge of short of potential conflict against the United States.
All right, I'd like to turn to an area that you have a great deal of personal experience, and that is fighting terrorism. We have combat troops in Afghanistan, in Iraq, and in Syria, and all of this has been aimed at a strategy of dealing with terrorism that recognizes a role for lethal force in military operations, but insists that actually dealing with the problem in a holistic manner requires much more than just military force. So I think we can all appreciate the role of military force in what are so-called decapitation strategies, trying to take out senior leaders like Osama bin Laden and Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. I don't think anybody doesn't understand how military violence plays a role there. But another element of this is training up foreign security forces so that they themselves can handle the problem on our own. And there it seems the record is rather mixed. We've been training the Afghan National Security Forces since at least 2009. We spent many years training the Iraqi forces. When ISIS came in 2014, the Iraqi forces didn't fare very well. There still seems to be persistent, deep, debilitating corruption in the Afghan forces. How well do you think we can do that second mission of actually creating capable, responsive national security forces, army and police, so that they can handle these problems that we also have an interest in?
I would agree that our record has been mixed. And part of that has fluctuated, a number of people doing that. But I think the option is you have 3 choices. You go there and fight them yourself, and we accept the consequences of loss of American lives and property. You train the foreign partner to do it to the best of their ability, and you work with them on their other institutions of government, or you leave. So I think we would all prefer to train the partner to do it and not have our forces there doing direct action. I guess it's against a critically high priority target like Baghdadi or any of those other individuals who are no longer breathe our air and eat our food. And I think leaving has its own list of potential consequences, because if you leave, there's the risk that someone else will come in and fill the vacuum. There is a space that's going to be filled. So to train them and work with them, you can't build a military. It takes a generation. And so we've been at it for a while. I think, remember, we were in Iraq. The Iraqi security forces were there, and then we left at the end of 2011. And then ISIS came up in Syria, and then they invaded Iraq, and the Iraqis, in most cases, were not effective in defending. There were some units that did actually stay and fight. And then we went back and offered our assistance, and it was the Iraqis themselves, with U.S. support and advisors and air power, that actually did the fighting and repelled ISIS. And then the Kurds in Syria did the same thing. So the model works, but it does take a sustained commitment. Afghanistan is a very complicated issue, and I've never served there, so there are probably many in this room that have. I visited there a number of times, but it's not the same as having served there. But I know there are Marines and soldiers there that are still trying. They're still there today. They're combat troops, but they're not just a small group are doing counterterrorism strikes, but the majority of them are there to train, advise, and assist the Afghans to give them the wherewithal and to secure their area. But again, there's no military solution to this. So until the Taliban and the Afghan government and all the other people that are potential players in this thing sit down and agree that, okay, we're going to stop fighting, and then there's a better way to do this, the military can only provide leverage for our diplomats and for the host nation. Now, the host nation wants us to stay, and we're not in Afghanistan by ourselves. There's 40 plus other nations that are there with us, part of that coalition of partners and alliances. And so they're there in support, not maybe to the degree we are, but they're probably about half the force. And General Miller's over there trying to leverage this as the Afghans go through their political actions, and Ambassador Khalilzad tries to get the Taliban to come to the negotiating table and sign some sort of an agreement. But you've got to have something to give him leverage, and part of that leverage, I believe, is striking at their leadership and say, hey, look, how much longer does this go on? Because I believe what I've heard, I don't know this firsthand, but I think the Afghan people are tired. If you were born in Afghanistan in the early 80s, right when the Russians came in and left, and then the Taliban took over, and then we had 9/11 and then other forces, you've known nothing but war your entire life. And I would think you would want it to end, but you have to do that. I mean, the U.S. military can't make that happen. That's got to be a political decision.
That's probably a good segue to my last question, and I want to make sure Dr. Edgar gets a chance to ask a question as well. But that last point, I think actually most of the students in this room have also never known a time when the United States was not at war. And I guess I'd just like to ask you, you have just such a distinguished career in the military, you're an extremely thoughtful man. What's your sense of that? This all stems from the fact that we had a 9/11 attack, and then Congress passed the authorization for the use of military force that said the U.S. can go after terrorists anywhere for any duration or anyone that helps them forever. That's my paraphrase, but it's not far from what the actual authorization states. Do you feel we are a nation in a forever war, and is that harmful to our society or our institutions in any way?
I think a lot of people have thought about this. I know I've thought about this. But as long as there's somebody out there, if I sat here and told you that I believe that ISIS or Al Qaeda, not the Taliban, or Al-Shabaab or Boko Haram didn't honestly want to do harm to this country, I would say we should just leave. But I believe they do. I believe they do. Not all of them. Some of them are just people who are uneducated and needed a job, and they're getting paid to carry a rifle. But their leaders, they actually have professed an ideology, whether it's culturally based or religious based or regionally based, that would put the United States at risk. So we're not out there willy-nilly going after everybody. We're going after people that we have actually believe have at least the organization has made a specific stated threat to attack the United States of America. Now, do I wish they didn't feel that way? I do. But it's become for them almost a business, in my opinion. And I could hope that this isn't a forever war and that my grandchildren, I'm a grandfather for the fourth time as of Sunday. You can applaud now if you want. But that my fourth grandson will not be sitting in a room like this 20 years from now having some old guy talk about fighting terrorism. But I'm not sure that's not going to happen.
Dr. Edgar, you served in Iraq. I don't know if you'd like to touch on anything we've already discussed or ask a different question before we open things up?
Well, sir, you already discussed much of what I was going to ask about your thoughts on Iraq right now. So we'll transition a little bit. May I also say that General Neller and I served in Fallujah together, and he put himself at risk for my unit and put himself at risk in various ways in order to get us equipment, in order to get us things that we needed in order to protect our soldiers and provide the enemy that we faced in Fallujah an opportunity to not be protected. But transitioning to last week and thinking about the future of war, when you met with our undergraduates last week, you discussed in reference to the Pacific Theater of Operations and anticipating what is to come. The cyber domain, the information domain, space. And I thought you discussed these things. Everybody is always interested in the future of war and in these particular aspects. But you connected these things, I thought, in a more practical way to what combat fundamentally is. And so I was wondering, would you be willing to share your thoughts on that for this audience?
Well, the strategy actually talks about the changing character of war. And I could say it's an interesting academic discussion. So the nature of war is one side trying to impose their will on another. The proverbial two people in a dark room reaching out, trying to figure out where they are, and then grabbing them, and then trying to make the other person submit. I'm not so sure in 10 years if it's not going to be machines doing that. But the character of war has clearly changed. And because of the criticality of the domains we talked about, cyberspace and information. And so because the United States and even our adversaries have developed a way of fighting which is reliant on the network, reliant on some sort of global positioning system for the precision delivery of munitions and for the precision timing of their encryption, and makes space absolutely essential. So now the United States, and I think has a Space Force. General Raymond is the commander of Space Force, or Space Command. I mean, we've always had a Space Command, but now they have been elevated to a unified command with their own commander as part of the United States Air Force. And that's fine. I think that's good because they'll get more attention, because it needs to be given more attention, just like we've given more attention to Cybercom. General Nakasone, who's the director of National Security Agency, also the commander of Cybercom, that we're out there fighting this fight every day. So the reality is, in my view, if we are not if there is another fight, and there's a fight going on every day. There's a General Nakasone would come here. I'm not going to put words in his mouth, but he would tell you in an unclassified version that every day the networks in the United States, not just the social media networks, but the networks that run our trains, that run our airlines, that run our water, run our electricity, are all potentially under attack. That someone's trying to get inside them to be able to manipulate them if and when the time comes. And we have to make sure that those networks are secure and resilient. And so if there is a future fight, and you can read Peter Singer's book, Ghost Fleet, is a really good book. And I'm not getting a commission from Dr. Singer, from Peter Singer, but he and some of his partners have written extensively about the criticality of cyber. I think the next fight, if you were to fight the United States, or we were to fight any of those other potential adversaries, the first thing you would want to do is what? gain the high ground. And what's the high ground? Information, the network, and you have to sustain yourself in space, because that's where all those things live. They all live. And space has a geographical dimension. Cyber and information are kind of an amorphous thing that are much more difficult to get your arms around, but yet they have there's a physical entity to all those things, because they require networks and servers and storage and routers and computers and people to at least set the conditions for those things to happen. So the next fight, if it were to come, and we hope it doesn't, I think is going to start and maybe end in those three domains. That's my personal opinion, which is why I think we all need to be very cautious about how we use our devices, how reliant we become. They always say, "Do you want me to save your password?" No. No, I don't want you to save my password. I'll type it in every single time, because I don't want some algorithm to have my password. And I think we need to be conscious of the fact that data out there is the new oil, and it's worth a lot of money, and people are willing to pay for it, or they're willing to steal it. So with that uplifting note,
right. One related follow-on question. This occurred to me again as you were talking to our students last week, and then afterwards when we visited the Nimitz Museum on Saturday of the theater of the Pacific Theater. How does the Pacific theater of war, more than Europe, more than maybe the fights that we've had since then, but how does the Pacific theater of operations in World War II anticipate this future of war? The distances, the standoff, the power projection, the speed, the necessity of communications, the tech that was involved. Oftentimes we think of, for example, we think of Gettysburg as anticipating World War I. Is this maybe something that we could think about as a microcosm for the future of large-scale combat?
Well, you study history so you don't make the same mistakes that were made in the past. And history doesn't repeat itself, but it does sometimes resemble what might happen in the future. So the geography of the Pacific is the geography of the Pacific. And if you look at the beginning of World War II, where the Japanese imperial military was and where they were, it's very similar to what the Chinese are trying to do. They're trying to establish geographical outposts to extend their reach of their weapons and their capabilities and their influence economically, so that if a nation there asks for our assistance, or they want to do something we're not in the interest of the United States, our ability to go there would be challenging. But so just like in World War II, the Japanese had extended out, and we were able to work our way in. In a fairly short period of time, rather amazingly short period of time, less than 3 years.
Right.
Go from a force of under 100,000 to a force of 10 million, travel, fight 2 theaters around the globe, but the nation then was mobilized for war. We've never been really mobilized for the war since 9/11. We've used an all-professional volunteer force to do this fight. Now, 1% of the nation is involved in the military. And that's fine. You pay for that. You pay for their service. But this would be different. So I think the Pacific is worthy of study, particularly the geography and what particularly the People's Republic of China is trying to do out there economically. And it goes back to expand the competitive space. If we're content to let them go to Oceania and Tuvalu and New Caledonia and the Solomons and the Marianas and Saipan and the Gilbert Islands and buy airfields and ports and establish enclaves there based on economics, then we will deserve to get the geographical laydown. The Chinese play a game called Go. It's a defensive game where you put marbles on a board to try to block your adversary from getting inside. So they're, in my view, in my personal opinion, they are involved in what I would call an economic game of Go globally right now. And they're putting marbles down all around the globe. Some places where we have marbles now. And they're asking the country there to pick their marble as opposed to ours. So this goes back to the strategy's need to expand the competitive space, to challenge where we think it's in our interest to challenge, not to have to compete economically and with foreign aid. You know, Secretary Mattis had a famous quote. He said he was asked if the State Department budget were cut by 25%, what would that mean? He said, I'd have to increase the size of the military by 100%. So there's a recognition in this strategy and in those in uniform that this is an interagency fight, that expanding this competitive space is not a uniform military action. In reality, it's economic, it's diplomatic, it's information. We have to be out there, compete, and sell to these other nations that we are the partner of choice. We will be there and be reliable, that we will support you economic within our capabilities. We expect you to not be corrupt and value human rights. But at the same time, you know, we are the nation that you should choose. And to do that, you have to be present and you have to compete. But I appreciate everybody's attention and sticking around, and thank you for your time.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Horns of a Dilemma, and please don't forget to visit our website at tnsr.org.